Divorced people looking back to when you got married, were there signs that your marriage wouldn't last? One of my friends made a point to catch me right before walking down the aisle and said, "I parked close in case you wanted to run." Like seriously, I'm parked right there. Should have ducking left. A friend of mine had his boss walk up to him while waiting to go into the church. Boss handed him the keys his truck and said, "There's 10 grand in the back and the tank is full. Leave now." Turns out the boss wasn't kidding. Divorce a year later. She took everything and left him with insane amounts of debt. Soon after our wedding, she told me I'm not interested in sex anymore and it was down to 3-4 times a year. Also, she lived with her mother until we were married and cried every day for months, even though we lived less than 10 minutes away. A couple of months after the wedding, I was homesick because I was spending Christmas so far from my family. She not only didn't help, she made me feel worse. So I spent a couple of hours on Christmas Eve walking alone through the neighborhood and crying. Coming from the child, I realized my parents weren't going to last when daddy was throwing a car battery at mom's head. Adults of future children, spare us the bullshit and don't stay with the person for the kids until it gets to the point where you want to kill them. We're not ducking stupid. I was the best man at my brother's wedding. I was standing beside him at the altar, looking at his bride. During their vows she couldn't look him in the eye for more than a second. I knew then that she wasn't really in love. 1 year later they were divorced. My first memory is of being held by my dad at about 2 years old, and him saying something to make my mom cry. I was holding a die-cast car, and I jammed the thing into his ducking eye. Kids don't fully understand what's going on, but they get the gist. Edit, sorry. Replied to the wrong comment. Do you tell friends when you realize their marriage is doomed? We went canoeing with a recently engaged couple and not 10 feet from pushing off they had already flipped the canoe and were yelling at each other. And these were both avid outdoorsy people. Not their first time canoeing. They were both miserable the rest of the trip. At that point we knew they just weren't right for each other. Their marriage wasn't ever all that happy yet lasted 5 years. I really think the canoe test is a good way to judge a relationship, how well you work together and how you handle inevitable disaster. I knew our marriage was doomed when she gave me a gum rack. I don't even own a gum, let alone multiple gums, which would necessitate an entire rack. Yep. Many of them. Things like how she was overly secretive. And there were entire groups of friends I'd never met, only heard about in passing. I was also her first real boyfriend. And first partner. Big mistake. She needed to work some relationship stuff. We'd had similar life goals. And because she was sick a lot, I took care of her and her illness for many years. I'd managed to convince myself that being needed by someone was enough to last a lifetime. In the end, she got better and had an affair right before our wedding. I forgave her, and we did counseling. But she realized she didn't have enough life experience yet to commit to a marriage. We don't talk anymore, but I know she's doing well and is happy. That's enough for me. I'm happy. Too. Dart. Here's a happy divorce story. I got married at 21. We didn't want a church wedding, but she wanted her childhood minister to officiate. So we had to have 2 counseling sessions with the guy. One of the things he had us do was fill out a survey rating how important certain things are to us. And it was supposed to show how compatible our values were. He then discussed the differences with us and asked if we were concerned about them. The differences were nothing major. And I actually can't remember them. It was all very vague. We didn't take it seriously at all. 10 years went by, and we hardly ever fought. We were the token happy marriage among our friends. But in that last year we suddenly stopped wanting to be around each other. Stopped talking. And stopped having sex. I'm still not entirely sure what happened. It was my idea to split up. We did it on very friendly terms. As she was moving out we found the notes her minister had given us. While our differences in values were still pretty minor, Everything he'd written made more sense than it had 10 years ago. We got sad about it for a few minutes. Then had divorce 6 on the floor. And I regret nothing. We married because we got pregnant. Shouldn't have done that. A co-worker of mine married because she was pregnant. Knew her so for a week. He leaves to Vietnam, comes back, they have another baby. They marry. They have been together for 45 years, still happy. I got married at the courthouse downtown. Immediately after signing the papers and being pronounced married, we walked outside to leave. My new husband spent the next hour and a half talking to his buddy and texting while I walked behind them. They then dropped me off at home and left. It didn't last long. When we were first together, my husband's self-centered personality didn't bother me all that much because he did his own thing. I did my own thing. Fast forward 10 years and 2 kids later. His inability to help me and his my way or the highway attitude makes me think it'd be just as easy without him. I look back and realize that he scared me even in the beginning. A week before our wedding he flipped out on me in the parking lot of a hotel that one of his groomsmen was staying at. They called the cops and everything. Fast forward to married life and he was verbally abusive and isolating. Later it progressed to financially restricting me. I was a waitress and he cleaned out my pockets daily after work. He never allowed me to call home to my family and I wasn't allowed to have friends. He hit me and almost broke my wrist one night. To top it all off, the 6 was never consensual or something I wanted. Just something he told me was my job, so he took it. 10 years and lots of therapy for PTSD later, I still struggle with depression and anxiety and I have major intimacy issues. We never got married, but we were engaged for years. First sign A, before things fell apart. I worked a blue-collar job and she was a secretary in a nearby building, so I would often see her during lunch breaks and after work. Whenever I went to her workplace she would always be talking to this suave asshole. But like an idiot I just convinced myself they were friends even though they were openly flirting in front of me. Whatever. Anyway. She was always cold towards me but had plenty of time for Mr. Suave's bullshit. Really. I should have gotten out immediately. She'd fell to pieces one day and I later found out that Mr. Suave kissed her after some party and that's what caused her to break off our years-long engagement. I get drunk with some work buddies one morning and I decide I'm gonna go kick Mr. Suave's ass. So I go up their office and I'm about to beat the shit out of him when this asshole White stands up and maces me right in the eyes. Feels bad, man. First it was her new les friend. Hey. Nothing wrong with that. We have a lot of gay friends. But then she started spending a lot of time with her new buddy, like every other night of the week. Fast forward a few months. My ex-wife was in the hospital and her friend was visiting. When I walked in the room, they were in a deep, involved discussion. And upon seeing me, my wife just sort of nodded her head at me, then returned to her conversation. I swat her. At that point, I could see the writing on the wall. It's all cool. Though. Still friends. And now I'm married to a wonderful straight woman. TLDR, I'm Ross. I've known my wife since I was 17 years old, turned 30 a few weeks ago. Going into the marriage, I knew that we would be together forever. I had always encouraged honesty and open communication in our relationship and stood on those principles. I can remember honest discussions between the two of us about how we weren't going to ever leave each other and would always support and work toward our marriage. I thought we had a very solid support structure and knew I would love her the rest of my life. We fought occasionally, but we're both headstrong. The first week of December in 11 she told me she wasn't happy. The second week she told me she didn't love me anymore. The first week of January she wanted to separate. And at this point we're moving toward a divorce, unless she changes her mind. I've been hoping she'll change her mind for 4 months. For all the good it's done me. There were no signs that my marriage wouldn't last. She was telling me she loved me and how amazing I was a few days before she told me she was unhappy and might not love me. I still don't honestly understand what happened between the two of us. But I know that I haven't changed. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe what she wanted changed. I have no idea. Ultimately, what I'm getting at is that I knew my marriage would last forever from the moment I met her. Until the last time I begged her to stay and she said no. I had no idea the marriage was heading south. I was working 2 jobs after my son was born because my wife didn't want to work for the first year of our son's life. I loved her, so I agreed. About halfway through that first year, I came home from my overnight job and all my sheet was on the porch and a note written on cardboard that said to go to my parents' house. That she no longer loved me. I did absolutely nothing to support her or our son. I slept all the time. Well, I was working 2 ducking jobs for our goddamn family. Been divorced 4 years now. Moved on completely. About to get married to an amazing woman. My best friend. She's awesome. We're still dealing with my ex-wife. We've got a lawyer and going to court for full custody of my son. That itch forgets there are consequences for every action. Treating the father of her son like a simple babysitter? Duck her. Wish me luck. My ex decided not to take my last name. Which to me is not a big deal. However, when asked by my mother what her plan was for her last name, she basically shouted, "I will never be a Smith." Just the way she treated my family in general, I guess. Full disclosure. My last name is not Smith. I am masking my superhero identity. I want to be honest with you whenever possible, Reddit. I hope we can move past this. Thinking that it was almost perfect. If only a couple of things could be changed. Now I am in a relationship where I don't want or care if anything changes. I know I'll be with her for the rest of my life regardless of what happens. When you hear things like "what if I cheated on you?" When the intent is to see your reaction for when she plans to do exactly that. When she says "what are you going to do? Hit me?" When the only thing she wants you to do is that, when you're not a wife beater at all in the first place. When you find a teenager's naked pics on your computer because she's been trading pics back and forth along with lots of phone sex. When the cheating doesn't stop after years. When she doesn't care to drive you to the ER when your blood count is so low that you are almost in need of a blood transfusion. And then drive yourself back the same day. I'm sure there are more, but I'm busy doing homework. Yeah, that marriage sucked ass. When I said 6 once a month wasn't enough for me and she said, "Yes it is. You hadn't already established this before you got married?" We had. We even went to pre-marriage counseling and it was discussed there. However, 1, we had discussed and agreed that 6 on a regular basis was necessary. For her, once a month is a regular basis. 2, she was under the impression frequent 6 was for newlyweds. So at counseling she thought we were talking about newlywed issues. Edit. There's a lot of comments showing some confusion over what premarital counseling is about. It is not about damage repair. It's about damage prevention. A good counselor gives weekly homework that makes you talk about things that maybe never came to mind. You'll discuss finances, housework, children, 6, priorities, etc. A lot of it seems like obvious stuff. A lot of it isn't. Looking back, a better counselor would have been very specific about the 6 issue and made us each explain our expectations in quantifiable terms. Before we married, he tried to stab my dog with a fireplace poker. I got bit trying to save the dog. The signs were screaming at me, but I thought at the time my love for him was enough. We married once I got pregnant. Lasted 3 years. I left to protect our son from him. 25 years later. We don't talk and my son is just graduating from university with a master's in business. I never remarried and am quite happy staying single. It does hurt knowing my love was not enough. I was 18. He was my first actual boyfriend. He was 10 years older than me. He was an alcoholic. He needed me to hold his hand in the kitchen for him to actually feed himself something other than a frozen dinner. And he was the jealous type. I married him so that he'd quit acting like an asshole every time I even spoke to another guy. Maybe if I made myself officially his, he'd lay off on the jealousy. But no. It only made him feel more entitled to being an asshole because I was his property now. Unfortunately for me, I was involved in a shooting at work, law enforcement, and began to have serious psychological issues about the event. The shooting was cleared. But the point was I had taken a human life. Even though I saved my own and that of other officers. It took about 2 years for everything to fall apart. But I have retired from that job on a disability and currently live alone in a small studio apartment. My wife was wonderful right after it happened. But I began to unravel. I isolated from others, became extremely paranoid, and began drinking heavily. My 20-year marriage is gone. And my 22 years of police work is gone. I'm not sure it gets better. I sure hope so. Disagreements, arguments, and fights went unresolved. And she liked to go for passive-aggressive digs instead of resolutions. It was hard to notice since the other 50% of the time she was blowing me. It's called the fellatio smokescreen. I know of a time when I was wrong about a couple getting a divorce. My wife and I would meet up with this other couple and they would constantly snipe at each other, mean-spirited stuff too. When we got home, we both agreed, 6 months tops, they're done. But the guy took a job in another state and commutes by air. He spends MF in his apartment in another city and comes home on the weekends. I would hate this arrangement, but they love it. When we see them, they're so much calmer and happier. It's been 10 years now and this arrangement keeps working. Maybe spending more time apart is the key to their relationship. In any case, they both seem happy and content with their lives. Who am I to judge?